Hello, I'm Mark Dunn, editor of Portfolio Institutional, and welcome to our latest Portfolio Briefings, a series that looks at how asset owners are managing such a challenging environment as COVID-19 not only impacts the financial markets, but our everyday lives too. And for this edition, I'm delighted to be joined by Vineet, Sood and John Wilson from Dalriada Trustees. Hi guys, how are you given the circumstances?
Vineet, do you want to go first?
Yeah, coping just about. Trying to make sure that we're not popping out unnecessarily and risking the chance.
Very tempting.
Yeah, I think I'm the same as Vineet, just managing to retain my sanity, although that's probably a subjective point. Trying to obey the rules and just hopeful that some of the restriction can start to be loosened in a matter of weeks rather than considerable months. But trying to pin anyone down as to how long these restrictions will be in place is all but impossible.
Okay, I think a good place to start was if we just tell everyone a little bit more about ourselves. Vineet, can you give us an introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, so my main role on Dalriada is to work as an investment specialist. So we have the client representatives that go out and meet the clients. And my main role is to advise or help with the investments, acting as a specialist in the area and providing guidance around investment strategy, picking fund managers and managing the risks around that as well.
And John?
So I am head of technical research and policy at Dalriada. It sounds a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it is my role just to try and keep the business and its clients up to date with all the developments in pensions law and practice, which are very fluid at the moment, as you can probably surmise yourself, Mark.
Yeah, I'm speaking to the right guys then. A good place to start as well. Have you ever experienced such economic uncertainty before?
In terms of my experience, probably the last kind of point in time was probably 2008, I think, which was the great financial crisis, global financial crisis. But even in those circumstances, although you had an economic downturn, which kind of came from the banking, mainly from the banking industry and subprime mortgages. But I think this time round, it's the initial kind of downturn has been caused by the coronavirus, and people are ultimately not able to kind of come out their houses essentially, and businesses are being shut down. So I think I've not experienced anything like it in the past. I think it's too far back for me to go back to, say, the Spanish flu times just to see if there's any kind of comparison to it.
Well, we hope it's not as bad as Spanish flu, of course. John?
Yeah, I think my experience is similar to Vineet. I was around during the last financial crisis, but we do have to remember that that's where the comparison stops. There is an element of economic and financial crisis here, but this is fundamentally a health crisis, and the focus, I think, as it quite rightly has been, has got to be on the human element of this, as well as the impact on markets and our ability to do our jobs on a day-to-day basis.
Gotcha. You talked there about doing your jobs on a day-to-day basis. I mean, how are the schemes that you guys are seeing? How are they working, coping operationally during such difficult times?
I'll probably go first on that one, and Vineet can comment on specific investment aspects. But this has just made you think about things that we take so much for granted, Mark. I mean, I've actually just finished an exercise just now, just going through the rules of pension schemes that we look after, just to make sure that trustees can still conduct themselves properly and make valid decisions without meeting in person. And it might come as a bit of a surprise, it did to me, that when I finished this exercise in about 10% of schemes, I had to go back to the relevant clients and say, I think you need to refer your scheme provisions to the scheme lawyer, because at the moment it seems to me that you wouldn't be able to make a valid decision over the web, because there are provisions in place in your scheme rules that seem to require you to meet at a place in person and make decisions which entail activities such as show of hands. So there's still some, if you like, some antiquated scheme rules out there that did not have this kind of scenario in place, and it's a very important reminder of why it's important to keep the documentation that's responsible for the running of your scheme up to speed.
Vineet?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in meetings and getting used to the whole having a whole conference call or video call is something to get used to. But I've found that in some cases it's helped to keep the agenda topics on point. There's less kind of deviation from the key aspects that you're trying to discuss. So so from an operational perspective, I think that's it's actually worked in its favour. I mean, there's obviously the downside that you lose the personal touch.
Expanding a little bit on the operational points, as I say, so first and foremost for us was making sure that trustee proceedings allowed meetings to be conducted virtually and for decisions to be made validly, across technology. And then just following on for that, sometimes decisions need to be ratified by completion of resolutions or formal documents such as deeds. So a lot of inquiries around recording decisions and completing transactions where normally you would look for a wet signature and where electronic signatories would work and would not work. And even when you drill down to a member level, a big issue which is coming up at the moment is for settlement of benefits, is requiring original birth and marriage certificates. I expect that you can extrapolate that into investment transactions as well. So coming around the problems of maybe sending things in the post and what technology solutions are there. This is a big issue for all third-party administrators, and they are looking to providers that offer them different ways of doing things, like verifying members before entitlements are put into payment. Big issue in the industry at the moment.
Gotcha. Vineet, can you hear us again?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Good. Another question. I mean, institutional investors typically do plan for the long term, but are the schemes you've been working with, have they put a plan in place to deal with such an economic disruption as we're seeing at the moment?
I think in terms of the investment side, we have been working with clients to set kind of long-term objectives for the schemes that we're working on. The primary focus is to make sure pensions are paid. But then designing an investment strategy that allows them to do that. And so when it comes to setting the investment strategy, we're assessing the risks they're exposed to over a long period of time. And so whilst we do look at the levels of risk that clients are facing, an event like this, it's almost like one of the extreme events that you don't specifically plan for, but it's something that you hope that the strategy that you've set is robust enough to cope with a downturn like this. There are issues around kind of, because the movements are so extreme, schemes are losing out as a result of it. But then it depends on how much risk you've taken. Have you kind of diversified some of the investments you've made, both on the kind of growth asset side, but also having, from a kind of DB, defined benefit pension scheme perspective, having liability matching assets in place. So we work with clients looking at things like LDI and having that in place. and that's helped significantly to reduce the deficits that not necessarily reduce, but reduce the increase in deficits that have occurred since the markets have taken a dip.
Okay. So are you seeing some kind of an impact, the crisis having an impact on investment decisions that schemes are making?
Whilst we're not kind of making any kind of knee-jerk reactions, I think it's key to understand what the issues are that have cropped up, where the dips have come, and is there sufficient, say, the covenant of the employer, is that sufficiently strong enough to support the scheme? I guess that element of it has become more pronounced now, because the viability of some businesses may come into question if they're not generating revenue. So that there's that aspect to consider. So we've been working with clients to kind of understand that side of it better, and to see if any changes are needed on the investment strategies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How big is the risk that investment income could fall if this disruption to the economy lasts, say, more than a year? Because this is the very real risk now in terms of length of time, that disruption to companies. I mean, a lot of these schemes these days are cash flow negative. They're constantly out there. The strategists get the income in. This has got to be a worry, surely.
Yes, it is. And dividends make up quite a big part of the total return that you see generated from the equity markets, even bonds. So in terms of the equity side, you've already seen today there was an announcement that UK banks have suspended their dividends. So because of things like that, means there's less income being paid out. But I think in a crisis like this, businesses are having to focus on the surviving the crisis and ensuring there's enough cash in the business to ensure it survives. I mean, what this means for trustees and pension schemes and members, they may be getting less income. However, there were kind of contributions that were being paid into the DB schemes that could form part of paying income out to members. On top of the income that's kind of generated from the investments themselves, and could also have, and I guess the only other option for clients is to potentially look to disinvest if there's a real need for the income.
Yeah, I think that's been our experience, Mark, and I mean, I was involved in a trustee meeting yesterday where the scheme sponsor just authorised some additional contributions to be made to the scheme outside normal schedule of contribution requirements, so a non-statutory contribution, but on the premise that it was only going in the scheme to be used for cash flow purposes, to make sure that benefits could be paid as and when they fall due. That was probably quite a fortunate sponsor that was in a position to make that additional contribution. As Vineet has alluded to, overall, the strategy of many businesses at the moment is conservation of cash.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that as well, there's actually a client who's done the exact opposite, that's asked for a deferral of a contribution because they can't afford to pay it in, because it hits the viability of the business.
So there's a problem as well, because you mentioned they're disinvesting, but of course with the way valuations are at the moment, makes you wonder if they'll be able to raise enough cash to cover what are some quite strong outgoings. But finally, I mean, how important will asset managers and consultants and other advisors be to pension schemes during these difficult times, where, as we've said, that sometimes there might be a deferral in terms of contributions paid in? I mean, how important is going to be the support network? John,
yeah,
do you answer?
Sorry, Vineet, you started there. Please finish.
Okay. So in terms of the investment consultants, asset managers, I think it's key that we kind of, as in the kind of trustee side of it, we need kind of guidance as to what position the scheme's in, whether there's any changes that are needed to the investment strategy, and in terms of so getting advice on the risks that we're exposed to, whether we should be actually doing anything. So I think it's very important. They form a very important part of the overall picture. I mean, it may be that some action is needed, but then on the flip side, it may be that there's nothing you can do right now. There's no action immediately, but just to keep monitoring things and keep on top of it to make sure there's no actions that we could take now that could benefit us in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, you know, I'm regularly getting asked about what existing flexibilities exist in the system and what concessions are being made, but by, you know, authorities such as the pensions regulator. And of course, we've seen various announcements from the UK pensions regulator, who's trying to be as helpful as it can, but that you need careful interpretation of these concessions and even more careful application of them as well, because when companies start looking into things like deferring or reducing contributions that are due under deficit recovery agreements, it can have wider implications in terms of even breaches in the scheme rules, which could end up triggering a wind up of the scheme or the crystallization of a pension deficit at probably a time that could be, you know, that couldn't be any worse. So I mean, it's good to have flexibilities there. It's good to consider them, but when you do so, you have to do it from very much a big picture perspective.
Okay, guys, you've given me some very interesting things there to think about. Thank you very much for your time. It was great speaking to you. And as I said, you've given us all something to think about, and it'd be interesting to see how things pan out. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Mark. Bye for now.
Cheers. Bye.
Goodbye. Bye.